Good evening, everybody. Y'all are right on time. If you wouldn't mind, as we wait to get started, yeah, exactly. Claudia, you're on top of it. If you could share your name and your class year and where you're joining us from, that would be great. In fact, I'm going to do the same myself. We have 28, 29, 30. All right, Colin, good to see you. I was just climbing last weekend and I missed you. I see quite a few folks uh in my reunion cycle, years ending with fours and nines. That's great to see. Andrew, I'm also right by DuPont, just a block away, so great to see that. But we'll wait just a couple more seconds and then get started. Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is David Hahn, class of 2019 and president of the DC Alumni Association. Before I do my little spiel, I'd love to hear, were you here last week at the last webinar? And if you were, would love to, um, could you please say, I was here last week in the chat. Just want to see how many folks we have from last week. All right, yeah, some familiar names. Great, great, great. Awesome. Um, so if you've been following the news, you're aware that there have been many cuts across a lot of different industries, including the government, across tech, international development, et cetera. And as we know, it's been hurting a lot of folks just globally, um, but especially EVES and doubly so EVES in the DC area. And we spoke last week about how career pivots are difficult as is, never mind when it's unplanned and unexpected. Um, Last week, Lee Cole's class 93 spoke about her career pivots and her personal story, as well as the wisdom that she's accumulated over the years and share them with you. And today, this is part two. We have Sue Harvey, class of 95. And I won't share her full bio because it's already in the invite, but I will share that Sue has also made several career transitions of her own. First, leaving Capitol Hill and DC. So, again, no stranger to DC, and moving into healthcare in Boston. And second, getting laid off from Blue Cross and starting Riverwise Leadership, where she is joining us from today. Um, so, Sue, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you so much for being a pillar of the community. And I will pass the baton to you, and I'll go on mute.
Amazing. Thank you. And hi, everybody. It's good to see some class of 95s and someone from my entry when I was a JA. Chris, it's great to see you too. So thanks everyone for being here. And I'm going to ask Julia we have a poll just to get a sense of where folks are in your career journey. We know that especially in the DC area, some people are right on the knife's edge of where they might be right now. So if you could go ahead and fill in where you are in your career, whatever's the closest option is great. And while we're waiting for folks to do that, I'll just say I'm so grateful to David for reaching out because having lived and worked in DC, I have been watching what's been going on, and also being someone whose work is in change and leadership. I was really thinking these are all themes that people are going to need support with, and I was trying to find a way to bring some of the work that I do to folks who are in these situations. So I was grateful to David to invite me to do this. I'm excited to bring some of what I do to all of you and hear your questions and hear your experiences as well. So Julia, do we have, oh yeah, okay. So we've got about half the group is actively seeking a new position. No. I'm going to take the fact that the only 2% are happy where they are as because of the topic we've put out. I think that's not representative of the world, but certainly the group today is here to talk about career change. And I see that also a good group of you are living in a role with active uncertainty. So that's another part of what we're going to talk about is what do you do when you're you have a job, but things could change at any time. And that's one of the most challenging things to be navigating. So thank you for that, Julia. And I'm going to just rearrange things a little bit here so I can share. So I want to start. Oh, okay. Let me start you with this image. This is what I know a lot of my time at Williams in my early career felt like and what maybe a lot of you can relate to. And this is a guy who's trying to navigate his way down a river. He's paddling hard. He is navigating around. There's rock coming up. There's white water coming up. There's edges he doesn't want to run aground of. And often I think, especially early in our careers or in careers where there's a clear track, this is what it feels like to achieve. We know what we're trying to do. We know what we're going after, and we just go after it. We go after it hard because that's how we got to Williams, and that's how we got out of it and moved on to our next steps. And so as long as you don't tip the canoe, as long as you don't run aground, as long as you don't hit a rock, you're succeeding in this and you're in it, you're focused, you're working hard, and you're moving downstream. And then what happens with, in most people's careers at one point or another is you end up here. The river lets out into the ocean, and suddenly it's a whole different ballgame. And I know that that shift has happened in my career. I've seen it happen for a lot of other folks that I work with, where all of a sudden you're going from, I know what I have to do, and I'm just but I'm navigating challenges, to now it's about choosing. Now it's about me really steering where it is that I want to go. And I use this a lot. This analogy came from one of David's colleagues at McKinsey, and I use it a lot because I think that moment of getting dumped out of a very challenging situation where you know what to do and getting dropped into a wide open ocean where you need totally different skills and where there's very little guidance can be what career shifts feel like sometimes. And I know for me, I was at Blue Cross for 15 years, and I really believed that I was paddling down the river and I was navigating the obstacles and I was doing good work. And what I believed was, I'm going to do good work and people are going to see that and they're going to find the next right opportunity for me and I'll move up that way. What I didn't realize was actually I was in the ocean and I needed to be steering. I needed to be clear what I wanted. I needed to be making choices. And actually it wasn't fair, arguably, to expect people around me to know what I wanted or what was best for me and help me to get there. And so I share this visual because as we think about career change, as we think about navigating the experience of change in the context of your working life, I also want you to have these two mindsets of, am I going down a path and the path is clear, but the idea is how to excel along it? Or am I in the ocean and really it's a time to choose and get directive and really set my own path? So here's what I have in mind for us this afternoon. And I'll say, I'm not monitoring the chat, but David is, so please feel free to jump in and then we'll take questions. I'll leave a lot of time for questions. So please share your experiences, share what you're wondering, share where you're stuck, share where you're succeeding, because I think we can all learn from each other through this journey. So what I'll talk about is, first, how does change work? What is this? We know it's unpredictable. We know it's uncertain. There's actually some constants about this experience of change, and knowing those and preparing for them can be helpful. Then, so what do you do? If you understand these constants, how do you actually work with change? so that you're managing it rather than it managing you. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit what I'm calling the art of moving on. So in the context of a career, when you've by choice or summarily or not by choice been dumped into the ocean, what do you do? How do you handle that that transition? So let's start with how change works. And the first thing I would say is that often change feels just like this, right? So you think there's a path and you're walking along it and it's fine, it's a little curvy, and then oh, all of a sudden you're walking up a wall and you're trying to be sideways and then you run into something else. It can be disorienting, it can be confusing, and from minute to minute, you might not know what it is that you're experiencing. So I want to introduce a distinction about how we think about change. And so I'm going to ask you a question. I'll ask you to put your thoughts in the chat. If you know this model, please don't jump in. Let's see what folks think who might not be familiar with it. So the question is this: what's the difference between a change and a transition? A change and a transition. And I'm opening the chat. Anybody? One implies growth along a track. Change is permanent, transition is temporary. Yep, intentional and change is doing for something for its own sake. Uncertainty. Yeah. So I think that actually, if you look them up in the dictionary, which I haven't, I'm not sure how that distinction would work, but I'm basing this on the work of William Bridges, who's one of the kind of founding fathers of or understanding change. And here is how he defines the difference. So he said that change is a difference in our external experiences. So in other words, change is something that happens to me. Whereas transition is a change in our, or a difference in our internal responses. So change is what happens to me. Transition is how I change in response to it, how I adapt to the change. And I say that because understanding those two levels can be really important, because we know a change is happening. We don't always notice that a transition needs to happen or hasn't happened yet. And once we know that, we can be more deliberate about making that transition, about helping ourselves to adapt to a change that's happened. So here's an example of how this plays out. So almost exactly a year ago, I went out one morning, I came back, I went up to the top of my stairs of my house, and it looked like this. So I should say this was expected. This was planned. I had paid the contractors, I had hired them, I had unlocked the door for them that morning. And still, when I walked up the stairs that day, I literally felt dizzy. To not have walls was destabilizing in a way that even surprised me. You know, we had moved all our things downstairs, and yet tremendously destabilizing to see kind of the guts of the house. Just, I mean, there's literally sockets hanging in the air, right? So that was the change. That was what happened to me. There was no question about it. It was done. And the whole thing took a couple hours, right? I went out, I came back, I had no walls. The transition, by contrast, took a lot longer. And so here are some things that the transition looked like. So for example, every time I would go to get something from my closet, I would start to go up the stairs. And then I would realize there's nothing up there. So I would have to go down to the basement where all our stuff was. Every time I would try to go sit down in the living room, I would stub my toe because now there was piles of stuff there that we'd moved out of the second floor. When I went to go to sleep in the basement where we moved down to, I couldn't get comfortable. I didn't fall asleep as easily because I wasn't used to that space. So those are all transitions that I had to make. I had to change my muscle memory. I had to change my habits. I had to learn to be comfortable in a new space. And that probably took a couple weeks. It happened, but it took a couple weeks as compared to the 3 or 4 hours that it took them to rip the walls out. So change is what happens to you externally. The transition is how you adapt to what's happening. So, and I'll offer this book for, I know many of you are probably readers, right? Since we're all Williams grads. I'll offer this book, which is called The Way of Transition, and it's written by William Bridges, who again was the kind of father of this and many other important distinctions about change. I'm calling out this book in particular because he wrote a book maybe 20 years earlier called Transitions, where he introduced this idea of internal change. And he taught it in academia, he taught it in organizations. Time went along, he did this all over the place. And then as he got older, his wife passed away and he went through a transition. And he was like, oh. And so for the first time, this academic experience that he'd been writing and teaching about became very real to him. And so I love this book as a very personal exploration of this really important sort of academic concept. So for those of you who are in a transition right now, you may find that a really relatable and empathetic way to explore this idea of a personal transformation. So that's a way of looking at sort of different levels of change, what happens externally, and then how we adapt to it internally. The next idea I want to talk about is what change looks like over time. So you may have heard this idea of a change curve. First of all, I want to say curve is generous. It's really a dip. Let's be honest, that is it's a pretty intense curve. So time goes along the horizontal axis. For organizations and teams, they talk about productivity being the vertical axis. If you think about it as an individual going through change, it could be effectiveness, it could be ease. It's sort of how well you can go about whatever you're trying to get done is what changes on that vertical axis. And so as you can see over time, you're going along, you're getting generally better at something, and then a change comes in and whoop, down you go, you're off on the change roller coaster. So a couple of things I want to point out about this. The first one is the dip starts at the first hint of change, not when they actually ripped the walls and floor out of my house, but when we first started interviewing architects. I already had that kind of that flutter in my heart of how am I going to do this, and is it going to work, and can we afford it, and what, where are we going to live? All of these questions. The first hint of change, part of my brain started processing all of that, which left less of it available for doing all the other things I was trying to do. So at the first hint, so if you are, for the people who are currently in a role but with uncertainty, know that you are starting down that curve. You are already feeling some of your energies being pulled into whatever change may or may not happen for you, because the possibility of it is already kind of in the air. The other thing to say is that the place where you start to go back up is when you first take a move toward transition. Once you start noticing what you need to do to adapt to the change, that's when you start to regain your productivity, your ease, your effectiveness. And so that's why the difference between change and transition is so important, because a change is going to send you down that dip every single time. And the way that you can start to come back up is, what do I need to do to transition? How do I start to manage my own adaptation to whatever's happening? And then the dip, which I have a colleague who calls it the Valley of Despair. And it's a pretty dramatic title, I will grant you, but I think it's really valuable because the fact is, change is hard, no matter what it is, even if it's wanted. I mean, we were so excited to do our renovation, and it was painful. It was inconvenient. It was all the things, right? Dusty, loud, all the whatever. And so if you're in a job transition, even if, again, you chose it, it's going to get hard. It's going to be uncertain. You're not going to, all your routines change. You have to learn a new set of people. All of that is going to happen. And of course, if it's unexpected and unwanted, then you've got extra layers of resistance that you're working through in that valley of despair. So the good news is, or the bad news is, the valley is inevitable. The good news is there's ways to start to get out of it. And in most cases, you end up higher than where you started. So, and the things that you do while you're in the valley can really impact where you end up. So change is external, transition is internal. Over time, you're going to have that dip and then you're going to come back. And then let's talk about when you're in the moments of change, what happens to your brain. And I know Lee talked a lot about this last week, so I'll do a slightly different take on it, and for folks who weren't there last week. So when your brain gets that first hint, remember we said the dip starts at that first moment that you hear any whisper of change. Whatever it is, however slight, your brain goes like this. Oh my God, we're all gonna die. Run, right? Immediately. It's your survival instinct and it kicks right in. So I'm gonna ask you guys to go to the chat again. I'll take this horrible picture off the screen because it's awful. And tell me in that moment where you get sort of seized by the survival instinct, what are the kinds of things that you notice in your body? What are the reactions that you start to see? And you may have even had a little tiny minute of it when I yelled at you just then. You can't sleep. Yep. Tension, anxiety. Yep. Sweating, shallow breathing, fight or flight. Exactly. Neck pain, a lot of that. Definitely. Yeah, you tense your muscles. And part of the reason we tense our muscles is so we're ready to move, right? It's like the ready position in tennis. Yeah, anything else? There's also often people will get flushed. Your heart rate starts to pulse or starts to pound. Snacking. Yeah, eating habits also can go to pot. Yeah, you go into overdrive. That is also really common because you want to do something, right? Your brain says act, 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 go, go, go. And so all of that is really, really helpful, except maybe the snacking. But the rest of it is really helpful if you have to get out of immediate physical danger, right? If you're on that beach with that shark, you want to run fast. You don't want to stop and think about it. You just want to like flex your muscles and go, right? If you're in a building that's on fire, you don't want to think about what's the best way to approach it or which stairwell should I just get out, right? Go fast, don't think about it. So that's what your brain's preparing you to do in those moments where you go into fight or flight or into the survival instinct. And as you may have heard, this is based in the amygdala, which is the most primitive part of the brain. And its job is to keep you alive. That's its whole job. And it's so good at that it creates all of these physical reactions, the heart going, the muscles tensing, all of that. And it releases adrenaline and hormones that will help you focus on moving to safety. What it also does as part of that is it actually cuts off energy to the prefrontal cortex, which is great if you have to get out of physical danger, but it's terrible if you're trying to manage a change, because the prefrontal cortex is the place where reason lives. It's the place where decision-making lives. It's the place where your ability to relate to other people without alienating them lives. So the good news is our brains keep us alive. The bad news is it sets us up in a pretty bad way for changes that have to do more with the social sphere than the physical sphere. So how do we understand this? Why is the brain working this way? So there is a gentleman by the name of David Rock, who's the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute, and he identified this connection between what we do in physical danger and what we do in times of change. And here's what he found. He said, social experience draws upon the same brain networks used for primary survival needs. In other words, a perceived social threat activates similar brain networks as a threat to one's life. So if you hear we might be reorging, if you hear we might be moving to a different building or something might have to change, it goes right to fear, not just fear, but mortal fear. And all of those same reactions kick in, as unhelpful as they are. So the good news is David Rock didn't just identify this and then leave it with us because it's not very helpful. It's just a problem. But he said, here are some ways to understand when this is happening. And so he actually identified 5 dimensions of social experience that can trigger this reaction. And he gave them the rather comforting acronym of SCARF, which is maybe a little bit misleading, but easy to remember. So again, these are 5 dimensions of social experience that can trigger that fight or flight reaction in us. So the first one is status. So how do I do related to everybody else? So that might be something like, I lost my job. What are my in-laws going to think when I go home for the next holiday dinner? Certainty. How much do I know about what's coming ahead? I need to make plans for my kids for the summer, but I don't even know where we're going to be. I don't know if I'm going to have a job. I don't know how to plan. Autonomy. How much we can control the events that are going to happen. If I take a new job, I might not be able to take any vacation. I might have to go live somewhere else, and it'll just be what it'll be, and I can't do anything about it. Relatedness. So this could be, so how do we feel about safety with others? And so this could be, I really love my colleagues. I don't think I'll ever have a team like that again. I'm really going to miss those people that were such an important part of my support system. And then my personal bugaboo is fairness. Do we have a sense that we're being treated equally? And this can certainly come into play when jobs are on the line and jobs are being changed. And I will just say for myself, I definitely saw some people getting promoted or getting benefits or whatever in corporate situations. And I was like, based on what? Like, how is that possible? I'm over here, I'm doing all the right things, and other people are getting the good stuff. So, and that for me then sent me into lots of unhelpful reactions, kind of as my brain did this reaction that it does. So I'm curious to hear for all of you, in whatever place you are in your career journey at this moment, which of these 5, could be all of them, could be 1 or 2, are the most powerful for you. Like I said, for me, I know the one that always gets me is fairness, although I do enjoy certainty also. But what feels the most important to you, or what's the one that kind of is the most destabilizing to you? Fairness, yeah. Certainty, autonomy, yeah. I do love autonomy. You and me both, David. Yeah, relatedness. So great, thank you. So you keep adding them in, and it's interesting. I think as you hear this, you can actually have a sense pretty quickly of where you feel like your buttons are, right? That this change may push. There is actually an assessment, a quick free assessment. If anybody's curious, I can send it out later, where you can actually sort of figure out what your particular ones are. But I also think you have a pretty good sense of them often. And I'll say, for those of you who are working with teams, it's also good to know what your team's vulnerabilities are, because you can work with those too, and you can try to buffer around them. And you can also, you can also create some buffers for yourself. So depending on what you're feeling vulnerable around, then as you start to do your own transition work, you can give yourself some support in those areas. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. And oh yeah, Mari said they're all resonant. I do. I relate to that also. I think my assessment was pretty even across the board. Great. So let us shift to how to work with change. So we know the brain's going to do what the brain's going to do. The outside world's going to do what the outside world's going to do. So what do we do about it, right? So I would offer 2 things. First is to manage the challenge. How do you want to take it on? How do you want to move within it? And the other one is find the choice. And really, that's the magic piece, which is hard and kind of like eye rolly, I think, like, all right, I'm supposed to find the good in this. Yes, And it really is where the magic is. It really is when you imagine getting dumped out into the ocean. The only move you have is to figure out what the options are and what you want to do with them. So that's what I'm going to talk you through today. So in terms of managing the challenge, the first piece is you have to keep yourself resourced. Remember, we talked about in the valley of despair, you're going to lose your energy, you're going to lose your motivation, things are going to take longer, you're going to be more irritable, especially if you're getting hit on certainty and autonomy and fairness, you're like, feel like you're getting battered, right? So you can't prevent what's coming in, but you can, I almost think like if things are coming in this side, you can pour resource into yourself so that you can tolerate it better, right? And everyone will do that differently. Bad snacking habits are certainly one way to do that, that I am a fan of, but there are lots of other good ways as well. So just the basics of nourishing your body, sleep, nutrition, exercise, dial up all of it. Give yourself more of what keeps you happy and healthy. The other thing is, I would say change is sort of like an existential sort of challenge, not just a physical challenge. So what feeds your spirit? What really makes you feel good and whole and connected to who you are? So for me, you can tell my business is called Riverwise. My whole office is blue. I love the water. I'll go to the ocean. If I can't go to the ocean, I'll walk by a river. If I can't go to a river, I'll get in the bathtub. But like, I have to be with water. That's my connected place. Whatever yours may be, just know that. And in these moments of change, give yourself more of it. Just don't feel like you don't deserve it or like it's not enough or you shouldn't need it. First of all, it doesn't matter if you should need it or not. You do need it. And you're going to feel better and you're going to move more gracefully and more quickly through if you give yourself those resources. The second piece of managing the challenge is to keep focused and balanced. So remember, you're trying to go through a change and your brain is going, we're all going to die, right? And meanwhile, you're trying to keep your focus. It's hard. Your brain is giving you all kinds of contrary information. But your job is to stay steady as much as you can. Does anybody know, I'll look to the chat again, what yoga teachers say as they're guiding people into a balancing pose? Anybody know the advice they give? Breathing is always good. There's a specific one, but yes, breathing is actually a powerful, find your drishti. Yes, hold on to your butts. Okay, well, yeah. So it is all about where you put your focus, right? So your drishti is your gaze, and they'll say, put your gaze on a fixed point. So breathe, stay connected to your body. 2, focus your gaze. And 3, put it on something that's not moving. Because if you've ever tried to do tree pose, when someone in front of you is falling down, I will tell you, you are going down too. I've just happened to me, I promise you. But if you're looking at the floor or the wall and something that's not moving and you're locked in, you are a lot steadier. And so that's not a big glamorous thing. It's not an expensive thing. It's not a time consuming thing. It's a tiny internal discipline thing that you can do moment by moment by moment as you're moving through change. So keep your focus. The thing I would say about that, extending it past balance poses to change and especially career change is 2 things. One, keep your eye on what's not changing. And the other one is what's in your control. And you can see how these are tied back to SCARF, right? They're sort of the antidotes to those places where you may be feeling bumpy. So what's not moving? My desk is still here. My family is still here. Whatever, you can get as basic as you need to be able to get something that feels steady. And then what's in your control, the same thing. my job change. I don't know what's going to happen. I might have to move. I don't even know how the process is going to work, but I can choose what I'm going to have for breakfast, right? It can be really, really tactical, but find it, focus on it, and relish it, because that will nourish you when you've got, again, remember the change is going to drain you. So find ways to replenish. Okay, so that's managing the challenge. Part 2 is finding the choice. So the key here is to think way wider, way, way wider. So you may not have what you had hoped you had. You may be really disappointed. I will tell you, when I left Blue Cross, I thought I was going to be there my whole career. I thought I had given them, the best years of my life. I had committed to them. I had been loyal. I had done great work. It sort of didn't matter. I had to say, okay, here I am. I'm not there anymore. What else? What else is out there? And actually, as I wasn't going to tell this part of the story, but as I think about it, my whole world was Blue Cross at that point. I had a vast internal network. I had great relationships across the company. I did not know my LinkedIn password, literally didn't know how to get on that site. I'm on there, every 3 hours now. So I had to think so much bigger to find the options that were going to work for me. I'll offer you another reading assignment for those who are interested. This is a book called Change Enthusiasm by a woman named Cassandra Worthy. She came up through corporate, went through a significant career, unexpected, unwanted career change, and tells the story of how she turned that into a series of opportunities. And the way that she talks about it, which may really resonate with some of you, is she actually says, take the emotions that you feel when you're going through change. So take the fear, take the anger, and use those as cues that there's something for you to learn there. It's a cue for some new opportunity or to find a new way of thinking. So check it out if you're interested. Very readable, great stories, and very relatable. So widen your perspective. Here's another example of how you can start to think about change differently. I have picked a very esteemed former federal employee, in case we've got some other federal employees on the call. So this is General John Raymond, who founded the space operations for the U.S. Space Force. I didn't know we had that, but apparently we do, and he was the head of it. And here's what he said. Today I will do something different. The difference will cause anxiety. The anxiety will create energy. The energy will enable action. The action will produce results. The results will provide inspiration. The inspiration will foster creativity. The creativity will generate opportunity. The opportunity will deliver reward. The reward will become the means by which I can make a difference in the world. And he said, if you want to make a difference, you can start by doing something different. So I just, when I found that, I thought it was such a powerful expression of the value that can come from the anxiety and the difference, and stepping into that and through it, and what can be on the other side. So perspective for what can be the benefits of change. And one more example of widening perspective and how that can be valuable. So it can often feel like when you're in a job search situation, doors are closed. And it's like, do I go to that closed door or do I go to that closed door? And I know for me, especially if I feel like fairness is at play, I will ram on that door like till it falls down, except it never does, basically till I run out of energy and I'm kind of all, bloodied and bleeding at the bottom of it. It can be really tempting to just focus on what's in front of you and keep at it, even though it's a wall. But often, if you can widen your perspective, you find this. So with just a little bit of a step back, a little bit of a turn of the head, a deep breath, and a shift, you can find something else. Now that might be a door you never thought about before. right? You may have spent your whole life aiming for door number one. And that's happening to, I mean, some of the stories are heartbreaking. So we're seeing some of that. And it can be tempting to see that as the end of the story. And I think part of widening your perspective is see that as the beginning of the story. This is what happened. This is where I am. So now what do I want to do? And when you can step back, then other options become visible. So that is the quick tour through change. Here are some tips. You guys, I'll make sure to send over the slides, but here's kind of a summary of where we've been. And then let me just do the final piece about the art of moving on. A couple of thoughts about how to integrate this approach to change into specifically job searching. And I took the next piece, actually, my church just had our pastor retired. She had been with the church for 13 years. She basically was synonymous with the congregation. We couldn't imagine ourselves without her. It was a very big sort of identity level change for the congregation. And some wise person said, here's what we have to do. We need a goodbye committee and we need a hello committee. We have to separate those out because we can't possibly do the processing of saying goodbye to her and releasing her to her retirement while we're thinking about what comes next. We have to keep them separate. And so I offer you that, and I'm going to give you a couple tips about goodbying and a couple of tips about helloing. And then I look forward to your questions. So let's start with saying goodbye, because I have seen this over and over again, and I've saw it for myself and also for my clients. It is so hard to see what comes next while you are entangled in what you're leaving. Whether you're still there and it's frustrating or uncertain or scary every day, whether you've left but you're mad or frightened or upset, whatever it is, if you're mentally entangled in where you've been, it's very hard to move forward. So going back to William Bridges, one of the things that he talks about is you need to celebrate before you can move on to the next thing. And I would say, even if your leaving was not wanted, was unexpected, was unpleasant, even if there's a lot you hated about where you've left or where you are now, is there anything you need to celebrate? What did you learn? What relationships did you make? What experiences do you have that you can take from that? There's a way that honoring the value of where you've been is a way of releasing that experience so that you can move on. And the next piece is, what do you need to do to metabolize what happened to you? So especially if you've left under circumstances that were unpleasant, you may be stuck on something, right? Fairness. This was so unfair. How could this possibly happen to me? So you might think about SCARF as a way to look at where might you be stuck. And the question to think about as you decide how you want to metabolize your experience is, what will help you accept so that you can move on, right? So we think about the doors, the 3 doors. If you're so focused on, I was supposed to go through door 1, you're never going to see door 3. So how do you get to, okay, man, I was really aiming for door 1 and I nailed everything along the way, but I can't get through it now. Then you can shift. And I'll tell you my own story. When I left corporate, I was distracted by my own sense of who I thought the company should be, and partly who in some ways they said that they were. And that was really different than how they had acted. And so my own coach said to me, write a list of what they said they would do, or what you thought they would do, or what their values were stated to be, and then write a list of what your experience was. And that was such a powerful experience for me, to accept the reality of what happened, even though it was different from what I expected and hoped. So it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, but I offer you that example to think about, what is it you need to say? What is it you need to capture? What is it you need to get out so that you can move on? So, and as a transition to the hellos, let me offer you this picture and let me just ask you, what do you see? What do you see in this picture? Go to the chat. Just tell me what you see in this image. This is not a hard question. Snow-covered woods. Yep, snowy trees. Yeah. Hiking potential. Okay, that's points for Sylvia. Okay, so a lot of people, especially if you're in that sort of goodbye state and you're focusing, right, you're looking at the closed door, you're going to see trees, right? And I don't know how many of you spent your winter study skiing. I didn't, but I know a lot of people did. And what I have always heard about skiing through woods is you don't look at the trees, you look at the space between the trees. Because then you see paths or the hiking potential, as Sylvia said, right? So as you start to shift to hello, you start to see those openings, you start to see those opportunities. And that is a shift that I have found for myself and for people I've worked with is only possible after you've been able to do the goodbye work. So then great, we're ready for hello. Yay, right? And so if you are thinking, fantastic, I'm getting my pen, she's gonna tell me the answer, I'm gonna have a job, I'm gonna start on Monday. I'm sorry to tell you, my recommendation is pause. Because when you've come out of something and you've been rowing down the river and you've been dodging the rocks and you've been excelling at the thing that was right in front of you, you probably haven't been checking in with what you really want and need. And I will tell you that when I left Capitol Hill, I did some youthful wandering in my 20s. It didn't work. I came back to Boston. I got on a campaign. The campaign ended because that's what they do. And I panicked. And I basically did a blitz of networking and I went and got the first job I could get and I grabbed it and I held on for dear life for 15 years because I didn't pause. And that experience has all been valuable and I wouldn't change it, but I did learn the lesson looking back on it that I just went so fast to I need something, I forgot to pause and ask, what do I really want? What do I want to do? And when I left Blue Cross then 15 years later, I did. I paused like nobody's business. I went and I spent 3 days alone on the beach in January in Provincetown. It was very, very cold. It was desolate. It was beautiful. And I could hear myself. And so whether you want to be between jobs, whether you find yourself between jobs, whether there's a voice in your head saying something's not right, I really encourage you to give a pause so you can hear that voice rather than creating what you've come from. So here's a couple things to think about, to reflect in that pause. The first one is, what do you want to keep from where you've come from? It could be the content, the kind of work you did, the kind of function you were in, the kind of industry. There's all kinds of dimensions of all of our jobs. And then the context, what kind of people did you get to work with? What kind of setting? Was it urban? Was it rural? Was it virtual? Was it everybody's in person? What was the structure? Were you on a big team? Were you a leader of teams? Whatever it is, just think about what's worked for you that you'd like to keep. And then, and this is probably the more important one, what do you want to create? If you imagine whatever supports you to be imaginative, what would you love to do? And just keep an eye that you're not so focused on that was terrible and I want to make sure I don't do that thing again. You don't want to go do the opposite of what you had before because then you're still being defined by what you're coming from. So as broadly as you can, imagine, give yourself space to imagine what you would want to create. And then talk to people. These people are sitting down. I don't know, maybe go to an airport and who's still standing there. just get curious. And I would say don't feel like you can only talk to people who are this way or that way or have this set of criteria. Just talk to lots of folks, and you can be at any point in your process. I've left this. I'm curious how people go through job changes, or I've always wondered about that. Do you know anything about that? Just have conversations, not to get to a specific answer, but to have, I don't think of a shark, right, with water going over the gills. You just want lots of input and information to be fueling your own thinking. So I just talked to a friend last night who had left a job and has been doing this kind of listening tour, just kind of talking to all kinds of different people. And it's really spurred some amazing thinking for her. And she was just buzzing yesterday with, this is the thing, and I heard this, and I heard this, and she put it all together, and it's really coming into something that's unique and special for her. So go out there and be part of the conversation, and make room for whatever may surprise you. So, summary on the goodbye and hello tips. Celebrate the good, metabolize your experience to say goodbye. And then as you say hello, look inward and then look outward. And I would say absolutely make room for serendipity, because the universe, I'm going to get a little woo-woo here, but I'm going to say the universe is going to help you. And if you're focused on staying on a path, you're going to miss some of those cool opportunities along the way. So that is really blurry, but that is our dear Williamstown. And I wanted to end here. Wanted to end here with a story. So I am famous in my family because when I graduated from Williams, I said to my mother, oh my God, this is terrible. All I know how to do is think and write. I'm never going to go anywhere. And we laugh about it still. It's my 30th reunion in June, right? So we laugh about that because actually thinking and writing have been exactly what I needed to do all the things that I've been able to do. And so I would add, what we learn at Williams is we know how to think, we know how to write, and we know how to learn. And if you can do those things, and I know you can because you're on a Williams alumni call, then you have what you need. And so stay focused, widen your perspective, stay in your strengths of learning and writing and thinking, and you are going to find your way. So I will leave it there. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions or comments or anything. David, I will hand the mic back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sue. Looks like we have a couple questions. I'm seeing three.
Great.
If you shared the question with your name on it, I'll be sure to read your name. If you shared it anonymously, I of course will keep it anonymous. So keep sharing the questions in the Q&A function, and we'll get through as many as we can. So Andrew asks, my last role was a severe mismatch for my skill set and strengths, which came from me not understanding what my true strengths and weaknesses are. I have since identified a number of potential roles that could theoretically be a good fit, but I'm wary of investing so much time into pursuing a hypothesis only to find 6 or 8 months down the road that it's not actually a good fit. Is there a better way to kind of test that hypothesis that this or that might be a good fit? Yes, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I think, well, the first thing I would say is the old expression, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today, right? So if it's going to take you 6 months to find out, but you need to find out, go spend it, right? I wouldn't eliminate that as an option. And I think talking to people rather than applying for jobs might be a faster way to get the answer that you're looking for. You are literally sitting right now in an amazing network of people who will help you. Wendy's here to help you find people if you need to. And I would say just go ask some folks who are in the industry, the role that you're interested in. What are they looking for? What are the requirements? What could get you an exception to those requirements? Just have those conversations. I'll say that because I did both a format shift. So I went to working independently, and I went from being in communications to doing leadership and change. And I just did it by talking to people who are doing this work. And then gradually they started sending me other work. That's sort of how I built my community. So I think it's really an undervalued way to get information. And people will tell you, you'll be surprised how much people will take your call and tell you everything you want to know if you ask directly. So I'd encourage you to just get out there and start.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. Um, so here's an anonymous question. How do you handle a job search while you're trying to manage your current job? Understand that I understand that it's a better situation than not having a job and feeling desperate to find a job. But how do you manage feeling like you want to share your frustrations and the status of your job search process with close colleagues, but knowing that it might be a risky move and rationally probably not a good idea?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think um, I wouldn't necessarily, I think they're different situations. I don't think one's better or worse. I think looking without a job has some ways that it's easier. There's obviously a lot more pressure. I think looking while you're in a job is hard because you've got, jobs right now are not 9 to 5 and you put them down. They're kind of all the time in your head. And so you're always carrying that. You have a lot that you want to let go of. That's a real drag, so to speak, on your energy. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. I mean, managing time, small, approachable tasks can be really helpful. I think an accountability buddy sometimes can help. I'm gonna tell you that I'm gonna reach out to 3 people by the end of the week, and you tell me you're gonna do something, and then we'll check in at the end of the week. To the extent that you can, if you're clear what you're looking for, then you can be in that just kind of getting the momentum going of searching. If you're not clear what you're looking for, you just know you want out, then I think that's a harder change to make. And I would recommend finding some way to get yourself some clear space, whether it's you take a couple day vacation days and go somewhere and just let it be about reflecting on what you want. But I do think one, accountability and time management to stay in the process, and two, creating some spaces where you're separate from your job so that you can have that kind of free imaginative space can be really powerful.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Hekuhi. And I probably butchered the pronunciation. Please correct me if we see each other in person in DC. In your experience, how long did it take you to shift to transition mindsets?
30 years, but I didn't have anyone tell me how to do it. So um, I think mindset is a funny thing because it it's like all you have to do is do it, but all you have to do is do it. So it is 1,000 tiny choices is I guess the best way I know to say that. So um, as you think about how you're starting a day or how you're going into making a decision, how are you approaching it? And then you may have to shift. Okay, I'm approaching that the old way. I'm going to shift and be in the new way. And then you just keep at that. And so, a lot of the time starting out, you'll realize 5 minutes later that you have missed a chance to switch. And then you'll notice in the situation. And then eventually you start to notice ahead of it. That's just how learning works. And you just have to keep at it. But if you're deliberate and focused about it, post it on the computer, all those kinds of habit building tools can help you. And also notice if there's anything in your way, because just do it only works if you're not secretly fighting against yourself with something. And often with these kinds of things, we are. So if it's not working, pay attention to what's happening for you that where you might be getting in your own
Yes. Thanks, Sue.
way.
Here's a question from Jackson. I feel like my reach out messages on LinkedIn have gone ignored. Do you have any practices or even phrases, wording for how to approach people that have worked?
So I'm sorry we can't be interactive because I'd be curious to know what you are doing and with whom. I have found if it's someone, I actually try to do them with someone introducing me by email. So I have a little blurb that I'll ask people, hey, can you connect me to so and so? And here's a little blurb of who I am and what I'm looking for. And if I have that connection to somebody, I find that is more effective. I've definitely found I tend to reach out to people if it's a direct reach out on LinkedIn, somebody that I've got that I feel some kind of warm connection with, even if it's 20 years ago. Then I'll reach out and I'll mention something. You know, I always remember that you bought whatever it is, something to create a personal connection is a way to do it. Another way is to just, you know, you want to say, I really want to hear your thinking. I really use your help to sort of play on their sense of expertise can also be helpful. But mostly I would say if you can network so you can get closer to the person and make a connection, that's probably the best way.
Yeah. So if I can also add on, one thing I like to do, one mindset I like to add on is, or adopt is, if you do end up speaking to this person, you are asking them for a favor, right? So make it as easy as possible for them. So when you write, say, "Hey, I've done my homework. I've scoured through your LinkedIn. I've scoured through, public mentions of you if you've done public speaking. Um, here's my context, and I have very, very specific, thought out questions that I'd like to ask you about. It's not just, can you tell me about your career, or I'd like to, tell me
Yeah.
about life.
Yeah. I just
So
like to
having
have a
very specific
conversation.
questions,
Yes.
exactly, and like if you're close enough, there's a time and place for conversations. But if you're reaching out to folks who are super busy, and folks who get these kinds of messages a lot, um, that thoughtful approach, I think, is the game changer.
Yeah, I'd also actually that prompted one more thought, David, which is I follow up with everybody 3 times. So, and that used to feel really annoying, but it's fine. And a lot of times when people do that to me, I'm grateful because I've totally forgotten. So I wouldn't take it, and I wouldn't take it, any of it personally, regardless. So reach out, follow up, and just if that person's not getting back to you, reach out to pick somebody else and move on.
All right. Looks like we have 3 questions. I know we're 2 minutes over though. Julia, Wendy, is it okay if we, and Sue, is it okay if we close out and call it after these 3 questions?
I'm good if you folks are.
Cool. Sounds good. Alrighty. So Mari asks, do you have any thoughts on attending business school or any other grad program for that matter as a viable option to gain more career freedom and perhaps a stronger network? Are they still worth their weight in gold? I also hear certifications could be just as important. General thoughts on upskilling to validate oneself in a tumultuous market.
So that's a little far outside my area of expertise. So I'll just tell you sort of my own personal thoughts on that. Um, I would be really clear what you want out of it and go in with that in mind. I would also, what can happen, I'm not saying it's happening to you, Mar, but what can happen is that becomes a really good alternative to doing the hard, brave work of having conversations and sticking with it and applying for jobs. I don't know that that's your situation, but sometimes that can look like, well, I'll just go to business school or I'll go to something. So I think there's lots of other resources better than me in terms of what programs may be useful for what purposes, but I would be really clear-eyed about what you're hoping for and whether that's really valuable to you.
So we have 2 more anonymous questions. I'm guessing this is a question from somebody who works in the government in DC. So the question is, right after being fired, I accepted that my position was over and started diving into the job market. But now there's litigation where it seems that the federal judge is close to ordering that my firing be reversed. Ironically, this is making it harder for me to figure out the path forward. Do you have any advice on how to think about this uncertainty? I guess it's a kind of Schrodinger's firing with the, are we
Yeah.
leaving or not, right? So it's tricky.
Yes. Yeah. Every time I see one of the rulings, I think about all of this because it's hitting the uncertainty. It's hitting all of the SCARF principles. It's Here's what I know to say. I know to honor that is a tremendously hard thing. You have to, I mean, find your fixed points, right? What is not changing? What do you know? What do you know to be true? And then how do you want to proceed? And I think you're holding 2 really complicated things at once. And think it's about resourcing yourself. It's about being kind. It's about having grace. And the other thing I would say, I don't know this particular person's situation, but there's a lot of people in something similar to this is, um, especially if you've been in a steady job for a long time, not having a job can feel um, like it's mortal danger. I think it's also worth getting clear with yourself. Do you have savings? Like what's, are you in a partnership? Is your spouse working still? What's your real financial situation? So you can right size the level of urgency to where you really are. And then if it's really urgent, then maybe look at some other options. Is there a short-term thing? Can you, do something to get some cash in right away? But I wouldn't just feel like it's an emergency and then pad, like get some facts under you and really be deliberate about how you're using your energy. And it's a horrible, really challenging situation. So I just recognize that. And it won't last forever. That's the other thing to remember.
Sure. Awesome. We have another anonymous question. What are some resources for finding new career paths? I've been in a very niche job for 13 years and don't feel that what I have done is applicable to a different job and can't even begin to imagine what else exists out there. Um, one thing that comes to mind is Lee mentioned Strengths Finder last
Mm-hmm.
week, and I
Yeah.
imagine that'll be a useful resource for you as well. But Sue, tossing it to you.
Yeah. I think there's so many ways of doing that. I don't, my work is not specific to career usually. So this is again, a little bit outside of my depth, but if you go to the career section, there's tons of a bookstore or library. There's so much out there. And I think there's not a right answer. The right answer is to be in the exploration for you. So um, I would say do some reading, do some exploring, have some conversations, and be open to lots of possibilities. There are lots of good assessments. I'm also a little bit wary because I think if you take them as overly directive, they're not meant to be that necessarily. So oh gosh, there's actually somebody had just recommended a really good resource. I'll have to get it. I'll send it to you guys afterwards, but that kind of walks you through a process of exploring resources to switch careers.
And this might be overly reductive, but uh, I've been using ChatGPT to kind of just bounce ideas off of it and say, here's my job description. I mean, I'm not actively searching, but here's my job description. What are some like transferable skills to, another job? So you can kind of say, here's job description one, here's job description two. How do they compare? So kind of using AI in creative ways. I know applying AI has been like is a trope at this point, but that might also be a useful opportunity for brainstorming.
I think it's a great idea. I've had some surprisingly useful and deep conversations with AI also. So I think that's a great idea.
Cool. And
You can,
looks like
sorry,
we have.
can I have one more thing I just thought of is, you can talk to the people around you and just ask them what 5 adjectives would you just use to describe me? What do you think I'm good at? Where do you see me get excited? Where do you see me really lean in and put in extra effort? Those kinds of questions. People who know you, people who you trust, don't, be careful who you ask because you're going to get real feedback. But that kind of reflection of the people who see you and know you well can also be really useful.
Yeah, and these people actually know you. It's not like just some AI, right? So
Well, it's both. I mean, I think AI can anyway. Yes, there's lots of layers to this, and I think it's also useful to just keep adding and exploring.
yeah, it's a yes and approach too.
Yes.
All right, one last question. Do you have any tips on how to explore careers you might have never heard of or thought to apply for? While the algorithm, I'm guessing LinkedIn algorithm is helpful, I find it's too tailored to roles I'm familiar with and keeps suggesting the status quo.
So I don't think there's like a fast track, I think you have to look, it's really look inward and then look outward, right? So do your own exploring for yourself. What lights you up? What are you interested in? What do you do when you're not paying attention? For me, it's writing. Like if I'm not paying it, I'm always editing. Ask my husband, he hates it, right? But so how do you, what are those things for yourself? And then especially if you're have a pretty wide open search, again, I would just start talking to people. Who are you curious about? Who do you like hearing them talk about their role? Here, who's a thing that you all have been like, how do you get into that? Just if you tune into your own responses to things, what do you feel drawn to? What do you feel bored by? And then follow that. You'll be surprised how that path can take you to some unexpected places. And it's not a rewarding, it's not like an answer, but I do think it's actually can be a really effective way to get to an outcome that will surprise you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you touched on this earlier, like going back into your own career or professional history to look at, did I like what kind of environment did I like working in? Is it small? Is it big? Is it family run? Is it small,
Yeah.
startups, or is it at large enterprises? What kind of team did you like? Distributed, remote, hybrid,
Yeah.
occasional, things like that. So I think being self-reflective about the experiences that you have had um,
Yes.
is a great starting point because, you know, that's the data point that we're working with, and through networking and talking to other people you can gather data points from others, so that you
Yes.
because you can only live one life, right?
Yeah,
um,
yeah. And you can also, if you find something that feels really wrong to you, that's really useful information, right? So whether it's,
right.
oh, I love or oh, I don't care, great, now you know. And then you just shift a little bit and then you choose again and you shift a little bit. I don't think there's a fast way to know what's right for ourselves. We're not built that way. And it's going from the river to the ocean. Yeah. If we want to pick a river career and go in it, and like that's a way to do it. And that's great. There's a lot of good about that. And if you're at a point where you really have questions and things aren't feeling right, it's gonna take a little more productive wandering to get to something that feels really juicy. But I'll tell you, I did it. I hated it. It was totally worth it. I wouldn't trade it for a second. So that's my pitch for that process.
Yeah. Yeah, the discomfort being, you know you're anxious, you're uncomfortable for a reason. It's your body getting excited for this new challenge, right? So that
Yeah.
really resonates with me,
Yeah.
and I'm sure with the audience as well.
Yeah.
um I think those are all the questions. Sue, any parting words of wisdom?
I will just say be brave and take care of yourself. That's the best way I know to make it through change. I'll also say if this material about change resilience resonates with you and you know other folks who would benefit from it. I had my contact information, but anyway, I'm sure it's been the invitation or somewhere. So please just be in touch. And for all of you who are in the middle of this, I have been there and I have come out the other side, and you will too. And I believe that firmly, and you'll be better for it. So hang in there.
Thank you, Sue. And in the middle of April, so I guess about a month from now, I'll be doing another webinar as well about the tactical kind of tips on how to leverage LinkedIn to move careers, move jobs. So that'll be the third part to this series.
And David
Sue,
is a
thank you so
whiz.
much.
That's so he's really good at the LinkedIn navigating. So yeah,
I do spend a lot of time on it. Sue, thanks so much for being here. Thank you
awesome.
for being
Thanks again,
here.
David,
And
and
then
everyone.
absolutely. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Julie, as well. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah. Thanks all. Take care. Bye.
Cheers.